I'm getting a bit confused here. In any case, we are going into the match, and what I was saying earlier to was the fact that they both banned Shaman, so apparently not willing to deal with Shaman in this instance. And like I mentioned before, I think banning something, I mean, obviously you can only win one game. It's not really like Last Hero Standing, where if you if you don't ban a certain deck, you might just lose 3-0 to it, or you lose all 3 games to that deck. Whereas in this case, you're only banning really one win from them, but you can, set it up so that you win against one particular class in this situation. In any case, looks like we have a Reno versus Reno. You typically, as we obviously see the Reno in Zoro's hand right now, but the indicators before that were the Demon Wrath in Zoro's hand and the Twisting Nether in the hand of Anderonie, cards which you really wouldn't play in any other deck.
Yeah, I think when you look at the Reno lock as opposed to other, it started off as hand lock. Okay, that was the base, and then you start mixing in demons, and then Reno comes out, and you're like, wow, this really fits very well with the deck. So for Reno lock specifically, it plays a little bit like Priest, because for a large part of the game you're just looking for for ways to deal with things. Like, you want to have options. So things like Twisting Nether is sort of that catch-all. It says, hey, stuff's going pretty badly, I need to clear the board, and you just need to get everything out of there. And of course the same thing from a lot of taunts, a lot of things like Healbot. They're also in the deck there as well, to just play defensively up until you get a chance to either drop down your Molten Giant or a lot of the late game options. Because if I recall correctly, this deck actually curves pretty high.
Yeah, it does curve pretty high. The way it's able to get away with that, I mean, obviously it has some early game options to deal with the more aggressive decks, but the way it's able to get away with curving so high is that you're able to basically have a reset the game card with the Reno. I mean, you don't really want to be playing Reno when your opponent has a huge board, but hopefully you've managed the game well enough that if they're putting a lot of pressure on your face, they probably don't have too much of a board because you've been trying to combat that. And at that point, you play the Reno Jackson, and you're all the way back at 30 again. And then if they're an aggressive deck, they have to start over. Even if they're a mid-range deck, that's kind of backbreaking for them. In any case, as far as this game is concerned, it looks like Zoro has the tempo advantage on the board. Anderonie has been able to pick up a lot of cards by tapping. He also got the power rolling off of the Dark Peddler, but yeah, he is kind of on the back foot, having to respond. He's already used a Dark Bomb here and his Owl. Remember, these players pretty much have to play one-ofs of everything. Recently, players have kind of shied away from playing two-ofs in Reno decks, unless they're a deck unless they really have a good way to deal with aggro. Something like or more grind, something like freeze mates, things with a lot of options in the early game. But for this kind of Warlock, you basically don't have surefire options in the early game, or else you're just going to lose control. So what players have found that is you can't really, if you get the Reno, it has to almost 100% get its effect off, and so that means that players have started shying away from putting 2 Moltens, for instance, in their decks.
Yeah, and especially because, like you said, you don't want to get robbed of your opportunity to play Reno, so the consistency is there. Sometimes players, like there was a version of Reno Freeze Mage where you'd still have doubles of some cards, but you'd still run Reno, and that made sense to me up until I saw a player drop down Reno without playing his second Ice Barrier, and it did nothing. And at that point, you start to realize why you need that consistency of just only one of everything. But you can only have one of legendary cards, and there's Emperor Thorzen coming into the hand here in just a second. I think I might be a little bit ahead.
Right, I'm still screen sharing, by the way, so if that's
okay,
not mine.
Apologies for that. It was freezing up for me for a second. So yeah, back to the screen share. There's Emperor Thor's, and you can see him coming down there, and a great place to play him. A very, very full hand. It doesn't really discount a couple of the cards. You had both Power Overwhelmings are now free. That's pretty cool, but it won't discount the coin, of course. You can't get mana by paying a card. It's going to cost you -1 mana, so you get mana by...
I wish.
Unfortunately, it doesn't do that.
Well, I mean, it actually costs you -1, because once you you play low step, you will jump by 5. Like if you discount something like Sacrificial Pact, and if your opponent plays low step, then you cost 4 mana to play it.
Right. With something like Sacrificial Pact, that could be something that could be useful, having it cost a bit less than it normally would with the Lothib kind of negative effect there. But as far as going, I can't really see you playing going when Lotho comes in the field. In any case, we do have these players kind of going back and forth here. Andrew's a bit behind on board still. And, you know, he doesn't really have anything that's really scary. He has, I mean, M-Gang Boss is tiny. He has, you know, a bunch of answers in the form of Big Game Hunter and, the Siphon Tool. I mean, you can kind of even consider the Healbot an answer in a way, because if you're taking too much damage, you can kind of bounce back up. And obviously, you know, Twisting Nether is the ultimate answer. But basically, he's looking to establish the board and basically win with those 2 Power Whelmings in hand. Looks like that was the strategy from the beginning, particularly when he picked the Power Whelming off of the Dark Peddler. And from Zoro's perspective, if you're counting damage, a lot of times you overlook the fact that your opponent could have 2 Power Whelmings, because obviously you can't have 2 in the deck. You know, you can't have 2 put in the deck. One has to come from something like a Dark Peddler. That said, Zoro's a pretty experienced player, so I mean, we could see him kind of read into the fact that the card that Anderonie took is either Soulfire or Power Whelming, based on the fact, or based by, you know, how Anderonie's played so far, which he hasn't really played that card yet.
All right. Well, I think the you can never really decide who's going to win the game up until you have the Renos drop down. So it's at the point where those cards start to come onto the field. Because for both, it's sort of like when you're casting Freeze Mage decks before Alexstrasza comes down, the health totals don't really matter, because you need to see whether or not they're used offensively or defensively or what have you. But for these decks, it's going to be Reno. So the idea is that you want to force your opponent to play that card first, or die, and then when he does that, then you can say, okay, well, I'm playing with a life total that I can get back, and he can't get that back anymore. I've seen some Reno decks run like Youthful Brewmasters, so that you can throw Reno back into your hand and essentially play with a whole nother life total, but you know, not all decks do that. It's sort of a little bit
bit gimmicky.
yeah, it's a little bit gimmicky, so of course, Youthful Brewmaster, not quite as valuable as a bunch of other cards. And when you're playing one of everything, you can have a lot of options in the deck. But a couple of things that interest me, you know, the double power overwhelming, obviously that means that, you know, it's not quite as... your win conditions might be a little bit different, because you've got a crazy amount of burst, and it's for free, as long as you have something on the board.
Yeah, absolutely. It'll be interesting to see if Anderonie maybe plays something that's a bit more aggressive. Obviously, Twisting Nether seems like something that would be defensive, but it can be a way to just, you know, stall until you have some sort of burst combo. It's still in the realm of possibility that he has, you know, something like an Arcane Golem to buff up his, or I mean, because he has the 1 Power Whelming, right? Not all Reno decks run that card. I mean, it could be used for Shadow Flame, but the fact that he has the 1 means that he could be running something like Arcane Golem, and you know, use that to burst his opponent down with a Faceless as well. And that's where the Twisting Nether could come in, just to be able to stall. Just so far, I don't want to, you know, immediately start criticizing players, but it seems like Anderonie is very unsure of himself throughout this game. Like, every single move he makes, he seems to be not really, you know, completely sure what he wants to do, kind of, you know, picking at cards, you know, maybe throwing on the field, and he's put himself in a position where now he's almost guaranteed to get a minion stolen by the Sylvanas. That said, he isn't completely out of the game yet. I mean, he's been taking a lot of beating here. I guess one thing I want to mention as well is that every single time an opponent uses a pretty, you know, effective removal option, that's something that the other player kind of wants to have happen. That's the reason why you put pressure on your opponent, even though they can Reno Jackson, because you want to put enough pressure on where they can't just Reno, because then you're going to put a lot of damage on them on the backside, because you already have a board, and that means that your opponent has to clear your board first, and then you're basically counting all of the removals. And so Zoro has gotten rid of a Dark Bomb and a Hellfire, and that's kind of a big deal in this particular situation. On the side of Anderonie, he had a kind of an awkward turn there, as we do see the trade from the Sylvanas come in. Picks up the Ink King boss. That is the better minion, obviously, and that's going to be pretty good for Zoro to see. They're also going to Mortal Coil this Defender of Argus away, and all of a sudden there's a lot of pressure put on Anderonie here. And what does he do? Do you just play the Loatheb and hope that you can't get burst down from this life total? Or, actually, Demon Wrath is pretty good here, though it won't affect the in-game boss. But I imagine that Twisting Nether is kind of a bit overdoing it here. So yeah, gonna go for the Demon Wrath, which is a pretty good use of it right here, and going to use the Earthen Ring Farce here as well.
So yeah, using up those defensive options, like you said, that's when you see streamers stream with apps that count their cards for them, that can be a little bit of a handicap. And when it comes to matchups like this, it should be knowable to like the top tier of players playing in this game. You should know almost every single card in your opponent's deck once you figure it out. And when there's one of so many different options, you can count, hey, I know he has these cards in his deck, these options out there, and really plan a lot more consistently than against a lot of other decks that may be running some weird techs or not one of just every single card. So there's a lot of knowledge that both of these players can have right now, and I think the biggest one comes from what kind of removal your opponent has. Well, there's a big one, Twisting Nether coming out, and that's going to do a lot to clear the board and sort of reset things. These decks are all about resets. You reset your health total, you reset the board, and it's all about when you do that and how much value you get out of that, and that's a lot of value to get. So Zoro lost his entire board. Now he's got to kind of rebuild it, but he is in a much better health situation, so he's in a good spot to do that.
Right, I do like Zoro's play a lot here. He's basically putting a lot of pressure on. In that last turn, we saw him trade with the Inking boss. A lot of times, you look at that and you say, "Well, you're weak to Hellfire," but he's already seen Hellfire. You go like, "Well, maybe he's weak to Shadow Flame," but then you say, "Well, I have a Doctor Boom on the board, and if he's gonna clear my board and use something like Big Game Hunter Shadow Flame, that's perfectly fine with me. That's two really huge removal tools that he's using, and that just plays to my advantage." So I like Zoro putting on the pressure and basically baiting out the removal. And we see the Jiraxis come into the hand of Anderonie. Not sure if Zoro's playing it, but typically you do. Otherwise, it's sometimes it's hard to win against control decks, particularly a control warrior. So I expect we're seeing that. We're going to be seeing that from Zoro as well. And I imagine he wants to pick it up as soon as possible, and maybe even be in a point where he wants to play his Molten Giant first before he plays the Jiraxis. But we see the implosion hits for 2. Anderonie is not happy about that.
The saddest implosion. So close, and yet so far. Yeah, you've got 3 options, and of course the 2 is the worst one there. So the ability to keep stuff on the board is really important for Anderonie because he has those 2 power overwhelmings. That's his. It's a big win condition if you can like surprise burst your opponent down from a really high life total. So definitely something to keep an eye on. More imps would have made that maybe a little bit more effective, but there's still that Hellfire in Zoro's hand, so he's got a few big ways to clear off the board.
Right, and Zoro obviously in a better position as far as life total is concerned, not really worried about too much burst, but he is 1 damage off lethal.
Wow.
Trademarked, forced in there. I mean, he actually had the lethal if there wasn't a Lothar, but that's why Anderonie played the Lothar in the first place. But there could have been the Hellfire plus the Dark Bomb. Now he picks up now he went from 2 damage off lethal to 1 damage off lethal with that power bombing. And as it stands, it's really awkward for Zoro here. He just doesn't really know what to do. I mean, he's gonna go ahead and Dark Bomb. I mean, you can't play Demon Wrath doesn't do anything. It actually doesn't hurt your opponent's minions. As we see, Jiraxis, it looks like is going to come on the field for Anderonie here. But actually, I don't think this order is correct because if that's Nerubian Weblord, then he actually can't use his Jiraxis.
That'd be really bad.
If it's Doomsayer, it doesn't matter. And if it's Mana Wraith, Mana Wraith doesn't make any difference either. But I feel like there's no situation where you would ever attack first. You would actually Jiraxis first no matter what, because you're not going to not get Jiraxis out, right? So I think that's a slight misplay there from Anderonie.
Maybe just a little bit. Of course, at the same time, if that's what you lose to, then at least you're going to get on the front page of Reddit with the highlight video. So it's kind of a trade-off. But either way, I think the biggest thing to watch out for Zoro is just making sure that the value from this Jiraxis. Oh, okay. Well, there's one way to get value. 4 imps out of that implosion. I guess that means you're better at playing Hearthstone. Get more imps, but make sure that Jiraxis doesn't get too much value here. It's one of the really big things about having Jiraxis. You've got a 2-mana hero power. Summons a 6/6. That gets out of control. You start to Sun Fury Protector those up, and all of a sudden that's a lot of power, a lot of value as the game draws later and later.
Right, and as far as this turn is concerned, you do have the Diraxis, so you know that you were in a pretty good spot, like you said, getting those 6/6s every turn. Um, the problem is, Andrew has a very easy clear here by using Shadow Flame, but that's the only Shadow Flame in his, as we have some lag issues here. Looks like I'm going to have to go back to full screen. Sorry about that, guys. But what I was saying is that he has a really easy clear. It looks like he is going to use that Shadow Flame on his Sun Fury Protector. I kind of like this play, actually. He wants to get as much pressure on as possible, and he could potentially die if he leaves those 4 1/1s on the board.
Right.
I guess maybe with just the taunts here is actually fine, but I mean, this Big M Hunter dies to 2 1/1s, and in the meantime, you know, having it sit here right now, at this moment, it's a lot of pressure onto his opponent, and Zoro can't, for instance, play Jiraxis because he just loses the game. So, that was actually a pretty hard turn by Andery. I mean, it wasn't totally clear if you wanted to clear the board or not, because obviously you don't want to use your Shadow Flame, but if you're going to use your Shadow Flame, you might as well put a lot of pressure on your opponent so that you can end the game quickly, so you don't need the Shadow Flame in the future.
Yeah, and of course, all of these options, like we said, are, you know, they're one-ofs, so you can only do that once. So the idea is that for Andre, he's kind of running out of options. That being said, the options that he's used have been very, very powerful. He's gotten a couple of very important board clears from things like Twisting Nether, like that Shadow Flame, and he's got Jiraxis up for tons of value every time he uses hero power. But of course, if we're looking in the hand of Zoro, he's running some pretty good cards there as well.
But that's going to be game.
Yep.
So Zoro, basically, he didn't want to use his Reno right here, because obviously he wanted to maybe use it after he Jiraxised. Didn't want to get put in a spot where like he needed the health later, and in particular he wanted to be able to use his Molten Giant before he played that Reno out. So got a little bit greedy there. Didn't think that his opponent might have lethal. Kind of an oversight. Obviously you don't expect to see double power overwhelming, but if he was paying attention to his opponent's cards, as you can see, he's a bit upset there. Probably upset at himself for not thinking, or maybe playing a bit too greedy there. But again, you don't expect 2 power overwhelmings, but one of the power overwhelmings, I mean, both cards were unused the entire game, and one of them was unused off of a Dark Peddler, and if it's a minion, you absolutely just throw that on the field. There's so many times to just throw that minion on the field, especially when it costs 0.
Right.
Unless it's, I mean, I can't even think of, maybe it's like a Blood Cell Corsair or something, and you want to take a one charge off of Jiraxis' weapon. I mean, other than that, I can't really think of a situation where you wouldn't play the 1 mana card out, so it's either Soulfire or Power Overwhelming, and there's another card in his hand that he hasn't used the entire game, so I think it's a bit of an oversight there by Zoro. I think he played very well until that point, and Andrew is actually a bit shaky, but he actually made it up with a really solid set of plays at the end there, putting the aggression on.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was saying before. You can't really play against that, but if you think everything through, like, that's the whole reason Dark Peddler is in Warlock decks, is because you have 2 chances at getting a 1 mana 4 damage spell, whether it's Power Overwhelming or Soulfire, and those are spells you have to be wary of, because I think racial spells are more probable, or racial cards are more probable to get from Dark Peddler. So you gotta be careful there, and I just. You got to feel for players who play the odds versus, you know, our players who are careful enough to just drop the Reno and make sure to get the value there. So definitely some lessons learned, and that's going to be the first of our best of 5 games tonight.
Right, so yeah, again, well played there by Andrew, as we see him on the screen giving a bit of an interview here. We saw Montage, his wife, who is actually casting this game in the middle of the screen, looking a bit awkward there, answering questions from the other commentators, being like, I can imagine she's probably thinking, hey, he played okay, I guess, made a couple of mistakes here, but he picked up the win. That's just my guess of what she said there, but it's kind of interesting to see that dynamic play out. And Andre, at least in this interview, looking pretty confident as we go likely into our next game. Let's see, Andre has cleared his Warlock, and I believe it's Paladin and Druid left for him, and we have Zoro with the same exact classes as well, playing the Warlock, Paladin, and Druid. So Zoro has his pick of all 3 classes, obviously, since this is Conquest, and for Andre, he has to switch to either Paladin or Druid, both very solid classes, both classes that you typically see paired together. And I kind of like this from Zoro. The Secret Paladin actually doesn't do doesn't do too bad, honestly, against the Reno Lock, especially if you can get a good tempo start, I would say it's about 40-60 in favor of the Reno. But you can definitely just tempo them out, and that can be a pretty good matchup. So I like Zoro not taking the chance with the Reno and going with the Paladin, because there's a 50-50 chance he has a really good matchup against the Druid, and obviously if he's playing a mirror, then he should be fine as well. But actually we see, maybe I just misread this.
I think this is Reno Paladin, if I'm not mistaken, there for Andre. You don't really see too many Murloc Knights, and Murloc Knight's kind of like a mini Jiraxis. It keeps summoning extra stuff on the field every turn. Of course, it's not like that at all, but it's the same idea. You get a lot of value from it in the late game, especially. And I don't know, it's gonna be interesting. I love the idea of. Back in the day, you used to have Healadin, which just ran so many heals that you couldn't really deal with it. Well, Reno Paladin is kind of like that same idea, but you get all that healing at once. So it's going to be really interesting, but it looks like he's playing against the more standard Secret Paladin, which everybody plays because it's so consistent, so strong. We'll see if it's strong enough to beat maybe a newer version of Paladin being played by Andre.
So did you see any unusual cards other than the Murloc Knight? Because this could be just a standard-ish
it could be just mid-range, right?
Defender Argus is now what usually you could, but sometimes you just don't play that in mid-range Paladin, but you could.
Right. So I mean, I've seen Defender of Argus mid-range Paladin. Defender of Argus could be in both in the arena as well. I'm gonna lean toward mid-range Paladin because I haven't seen anything too crazy here. But it is going to be the Avenge, not the Redemption coming out from Zoro. Going to be, I mean, in this case, a lot of times I don't really like players playing out hero powers when they're trying to play the aggressive deck. Obviously, Secret Paladin is an aggressive deck. But in this case, basically, he's getting a 1-1 out of the Redemption most likely anyway, and you're getting a 1-1 out of your hero power. So in this case, I don't really mind it much. Picks up another Secret Keeper, which is pretty good for him. He can play out Redemption and a hero power as well. Gonna just buff that up a bit here. And even though you could get your 1-1, your Silver Hen recruits redeemed, you still get the buff on the Secret Keeper, and you're getting closer to getting a better Divine Favor. So it's ended up working out well for Zoro. That said, Anderonie, I mean, he's on turn 5 and he hasn't died yet, or he isn't too far behind on the board. And his opponent doesn't have a Mysterious Challenger, so things are actually looking kind of okay here for Anderonie.
Yeah, so for Andre, I love the stats that they put up on the stream. It's like, there's a 10% chance, 9.5% chance that he draws in a Mysterious Paladin. He's not a good Paladin player because he didn't get Dr. 6 on turn 6. Of course, that's just a joke, but the idea that there's such a lower percent, and of course they have the deck list, so they know all of these things. It's lower percent, but it seems to happen all the time. And next turn, of course, we all know the Doctor Boom's in hand, so definitely going to see that. And of course, with the Keeper of Uldaman and the double mini bot, this is going to be more of like the mid-range Paladin deck, but certainly a deck that I don't know. I was really kind of fanboying Reno Paladin, but it does look like this one's.
You wanted it to happen.
Man, it's gonna happen. I'm telling you. With as many Paladin decks as there are out there, somebody is gonna try to catch someone off guard with that.
We did see Life Coach try out the Reno Paladin, and didn't work out too well for him. It's hard to say, but yeah. In any case. We obviously did see that Divine Favor come out for Zoro here, and picked up some okay cards that equality could come to good use, especially combined with the Knife Juggler and the Unleash the Dudes there, and the Muster for Battle. So that could be a pretty strong option in the future. And for now, Anderonie doesn't have really too many comeback mechanics. He has that equality, but he's already used one Consecrate. Obviously, the Keeper of Uldaman can be something that could be used, but for right now, he's kind of in an awkward spot. He needs to use two things to run into this kind of Annoyatroned up, Silver Hen recruit, and then from there, it comes back as a 1-1, which isn't the biggest deal. But at the same time, after that, something else gets, Avenge, and that point maybe you use the Keeper of Uldaman. So kind of a tough, kind of a tricky situation here for Anderonie overall.
Yeah, because that's the other thing about mid-range paladins specifically is that like you're not built to play, like 20-turn games. You're built to play, 15-turn games and have every single one of those be incredibly effective. So you've got to make sure that you make the most out of the options that are given. So here the struggle is, well, do I hero power and get some more value off of this Murloc Knight, or do I use the Divine Shield that's on there to, along with the Keeper of Oldemon, help get some more of that tempo back on the board? And so he's going to go for that option there. Doesn't get the extra minion on the board, but of course, even that may not have been super great either, because, I mean, there's things like equality. There's no consecrate, but there's definitely a lot of ways to deal with that. So better to just keep things in a good spot on the board. And now, of course, it's turn 7. What card do you play on turn 7? It's Dr. Boom. Unfortunately, that may not be the best option. And, of course, you can see Zoro there thinking about Blessing of Kings.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Blessing of Kings allows you to completely, to get rid of your opponent's board, which is kind of nice, and then you can, put something down that's pretty threatening as well in the Snipe Juggler and the Avenge. And you just say your opponent use a Keeper of Oldemon, so maybe they don't have a way to deal with this. You've also seen a Consecrate as well. So I kind of like this, even though Dr. Boom was green. Dr. Boom wouldn't have been a bad play in any way, but it would still would have been nice. And actually, an Outdoor Peacekeeper is exactly what the Doctor ordered here. Gonna turn this 8-4 into 1-4, which is pretty nice here. And now with that pickup, I mean, that could be the top deck of the game here for Anderonie, because from here on out, I mean, even this Dr. Boom, he could maybe equality it, and a lot of answers in Zoro's hand, but not too many questions, and he needs to be asking his opponent some questions right now.
All right, well, one of those questions is, no, please stop, Dr. Boom is too good a card. But turns out there are a few other good cards. One of those is Equality. Unfortunately, that would also get rid of the 5/5 body that he's got on his Lotheb, so probably wants to attack with that first and then Equality after, if that's even the play, because he doesn't have Consecrate, which would be the big play to go for here. Well, but he is still going to go for that spell, maybe.
Yeah. Looks like if he attacks anything but the Dr. Boom with the Lotheb, then he has to equality second. If he plans on turning his Lotheb in, then he needs equality first, obviously. And yeah, it looks like he wasn't willing to take that much damage. There's probably some healing. There has to be really some healing in this mid-range Paladin, or else you just lose to every single aggressive deck. Though we did see him ban out the Shaman, but the point is that without any sort of healing, you're not going to be beating a lot of decks out there. And I mean, he just hasn't drawn again, so that's why Anderonie being a bit conservative here, gonna get a big board out, and basically deal with it that way. I wonder if Zoro goes for the equality now. It does take off 4 health from his opponent's side, but obviously wouldn't be too effective overall. So maybe he just plays out this muster for battle and starts clearing up the board.
Well, you got to get rid of the board somehow, and of course, if you found some way to work in a quartermaster to your deck, then you just win the game at this point because it's so valuable. Of course, you can see the stats there for Anderonie. He's got a 5% chance he gets the card he needs to survive. Well, I mean, that's another good card to survive too.
Yeah, that is pretty good, to be honest.
It turns out, even though your opponent has a basically full board, all of his minions only deal 1 damage, so that's not incredibly terrible to play against.
Right. I mean, to be fair, in this instance, the 1/1s are pretty good against the shield and mini-bots. That's basically the best way to get rid of a Divine Shield. And going to be the Consecrate here, as well as attack, I imagine, from Zoro's face. And then going to be playing out this Paladin Shredder and the Hero Power. And yeah, that's going to be... This is actually a lot of pressure onto... onto Anderonie here. And we saw the 5% chance for the Tyrion, but... I mean, it wouldn't really help that much. We see an equality in hand. It's not like Anderonie can really raise Zoro either, even if he gets the Ashbringer. So yeah, this is looking really bad, honestly. He's gonna go for... I think he's going for the Doomsayer here. I mean, he's way too far behind on board. Doesn't get it. Gets the Goblin Stalker, and how much damage are we looking at? 4, 5, 6, 7. We could see lethal here. I mean, 8 on the board, but we could see lethal here with the Boom Bot potentially. hitting for 4 into the face. That's a tear on the side of Zoro. They didn't do the
Oh,
odds
man.
for they did the odds for Andrew, not Zoro. And Zoro's like, thank you, I'll take that. Thank you very much. And this looks like it's probably going to be game. I don't really see any single card that helps out Andrew here. And it's not like he can, draw a bunch of cards into a couple answers. The best thing he could maybe draw is lay on hands, but then he's dead on board and no 2-mana, spell or creature or anything.
Mind control tag into control the TV.
Oh my gosh, that would have been the best
But
draw.
he'd still be dead, unfortunately.
Yeah, well,
even if
D2, why you gotta rain on the optimal parade, man? That was the play. Unfortunately, if you're playing a mid-range deck and you're running mind control tech, you're playing against yourself because you're assuming that your opponent's gonna have a better board than you are, which shouldn't be the case in a mid-range deck. But hey, maybe you want to go for it. Unfortunately, not going to be the card that he needed, and that is going to put Zoro is in a pretty interesting spot right now because theoretically he should be the stronger player, consistently either in his qualification run for BlizzCon and also in the Hearthstone team story. He's our Celestial series as well. When he played in there, like this guy is no joke. Like he's one of the best Chinese players out there, and for Andrew to go toe to toe with him, that's pretty darn impressive. So it'll be interesting to see now that they've sort of taken wins off of each other's decks, how the rest of the decks in their pool match up.
Yeah, and that was a very important win there. Mid-range Paladin and Secret Paladin is a pretty close matchup. And typically, mid-range Paladin has a few weaknesses here and there. It can be susceptible to aggro. Can actually be susceptible to some other... to basically all of the matchups out there. It's pretty even matchup against a lot of decks in the meta. You see a lot of people playing Secret Paladin now just because it's such a strong deck, but Midrange Paladin is actually very strong in its own right, so being able to take that out right now for Zoro and not, have his Secret Paladin be stuck, or actually the rest of his decks be stuck, is really important for him. He's going to be going with the Druid. Unfortunately, he's going to be going against the Midrange Paladin once more. And, Secret Paladin is good against Druid, but so is Midrange Paladin. It's not, I don't believe it's quite as good, because it's not quite as much tempo, but basically what you're looking to do with the Midrange Paladin against the Druid is the exact same thing as the Secret Paladin is trying to do. You're trying to get that early tempo, trying to get a board that's really hard for the Druid to deal with. We see Andrew actually throw away the Blessing of Kings. I'm actually a bit surprised by that. Obviously, it would be a bit greedy, but considering what his hand is, he has the Shielded Minibot as well as the Muster for Battle. I have a hard time seeing Zoro dealing or being able to clear the entire board in that instance unless he has an amazing hand. But if he does have an
amazing hand,
he does have a pretty good hand, but he's still going to be hard pressed to deal with the board that we're seeing. And I feel like that Blessing of Kings could have been the way that that Anderonie gets back into this game. He's actually already selecting his Elder Peacekeeper, which is... we've seen a lot of Korean players do this, and recently Chinese players as well. And this is something that really bothers me, particularly when it's not something... if it was like Mysterious Challenger or Dr. Boom, I can see just being like, okay, I'm absolutely going to be playing this. But in this case, he was just hovering over it already, even though he didn't know if his opponent had a 4-drop. So, I don't know. It's just like a pet peeve of mine when I see that.
Yeah, in general, like you said, you got to get enough value out of the cards that you use. And of course, whenever you're sort of that anxious to play a card, maybe you should think about it ahead of time. However, this is by far the best play to make on turn 4. Drop your True Silver Champion, chunk your way through your opponent's minions, and put yourself in a much better place on the board here. However, you also always have to worry about leaving minions on the board against Druid. Of course, this is a little bit earlier on, but as we draw in closer and closer to combo range, that's definitely a pretty dangerous thing to do. So something to keep in mind as the game progresses. Do you drop Emperor here? Probably not. It's only going to get one half of the combo discounted, and you can just go ahead and clear it this way.
Right. One thing to keep in mind is that for the Druid, you don't really need all of the all the combo pieces because it's such a threat for your opponent that they have to kill it right away, and sometimes that can be kind of difficult. Justicar is an interesting card in Paladin. I was about to mention that if this is going to be Paladin against the Reno, so that's going to be a very important card later on. But for this matchup, it's not going to be too big of a deal unless we see the Paladin, get basically have the time to play out the Justicar and elongate this game. But for Zoro, it's kind of an awkward situation, as we do see he picked up the combo. So he can play the Thorson, but he already has, Innervate, so I don't know if that really makes a huge difference here. But what I was going to say is that overall, Zoro is kind of an awkward spot because he has too much ramp, which can happen sometimes. He had the Wild Growth, had the Innervate, which typically is, all, everything's good with that. You're able to play stuff out, but you start to need card draw. And the Thorson kind of just compounds that, right? 5/5 for a 6 isn't the greatest. It's kind of a threat to your opponent, so they have to kill it. But at the same time, you're not really helping yourself out. It's just kind of an empty threat here. And, yeah, I mean, looks like Andrew's going to be able to take out pretty nice and easy. And all Zoro's has really done is discount one piece of the combo. So unless he picks up a second Roar, he's going to be behind for a decent chunk of this game.
Yeah, so there's a problem with leaving Emperor up. Obviously, that would be kind of devastating. You definitely don't want to do that against Druid, because then they just like double force or double roar you to death, and you're just like, oh wait, I should have killed that. So the struggle is, how do you kill off this Emperor Thorson? And the answer is probably not as satisfying as Andrew wishes it was.
Right, I mean, he can kill it fairly easily by using... What he's wanting to do right now is use the Aldor and then use his Muscle for battle, and then he doesn't take the full 5 damage from using his face here. Obviously, he doesn't get the Morlock as well, but he saw that his opponent couldn't deal with the Morlock last time, and now he has to deal with the full board of 1/1, so, I mean, he's not really worrying about too much. Zoro, on the other hand, if he does pick up Savage Roar like we saw the draft on screen there, he does have Lethal with the Innervate, so that's something to look for right here. Doesn't get it. Gets a swipe though, so that's probably the second best thing he could look for, to be honest.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's that one card D2. It's pretty good at clearing out 1/1s. You run 2 copies in every Druid deck. That's why when somebody told me Reno Druid was a thing, I was like, dude, there's this card swipe, Innervate, Wrath. You have to have 2 of them. So Reno Druid does not exist. Sorry guys. But Swipe does, and it's pretty good at clearing out this board. So really good top deck there by Zoro. Wish we could have seen the percentage chance of drawing that, because it's exactly the card that he needed.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, other than combo just win the game, obviously. But I do like this play, by the way, by Zoro hitting the face. Obviously, 2/2 and a 3/2 seems like a good trade, but his hand is combo, right? He needs to just win the game here, and that could just allow him to win the game. He actually has an extra damage right now, so he has 15 damage out of hand, just without even using that Innervate. And so, yeah, 15 damage out of hand. That means that his keeper represents, as we see, a bit of lag here. The panda jumping down with the TV. It looks like we're back, but the keeper would represent 19 damage overall, so it doesn't have it with just the keeper by itself. But if Andre can't deal with both of these minions and doesn't put a taunt up, then he loses the game. So with that all said, that basically means he needs a defender here, or else he's dead. Putting all that information together, because he cannot kill the both halves of this Belcher right now.
Yeah, so you really need to start taunting things up, and I think he realizes that, yeah, so he's just going to make the biggest bodies that he can on the field, and he can go ahead and, yeah, I think this is definitely smart to clear off the Belcher, but it's still going to come back pretty strong with this combo coming out next turn, and we didn't see the percentage chance of it this turn, but if either one of the pieces of the combo comes in hand, that's going to be even more devastating, but looks like we are just going to go ahead and see what's coming up. Like
wait, I believe he has lethal anyway. I think Zoro has lethal anyway, because the keeper goes in and he has extra hero power. Yeah, so Zoro sees that right away.
Right. So
really good. That Zoro actually saw that. It's pretty impressive that he's seeing this right away. Well, actually, it looks like he's reaching for the force, and he's actually just counting it while he's reaching for the force. I thought he had reached for it right away, and he's like, oh, I know what this math is, but I believe it's lethal. The 4 goes in the zombie chow, and then from there, like we see at the graphic on the side there, he has 18 damage exactly. So yeah, with the extra hero power, that's going to be the extra damage. Typically, when you have a 1 health creature on board, that translates into 17 damage, obviously, because it's 14 plus the 3. And so you throw a Treant into the taunt, and then should be 17, but obviously since his combo was discounted, and on top of that he had the Innervate, obviously he had that 1 extra damage from the hero power. That's going to be the game for Zoro. He is up 2-1 in this series, and he's going to be looking to his Reno lock, which he lost in the first game with, to be able to close this series out. I do believe it's a pretty heavy underdog to the mid-range paladin that we just saw, however, because of the Justicar, and that's something I wanted to point out earlier, but obviously we're in a kind of a tight moment in the game, but Justicar is very important in this particular matchup because basically, I mean, it's pretty obnoxious playing out your hero power over and over again against a control deck, and really, Zoro doesn't really have much burst. He has a lot of, really annoying creatures, but if you can nullify them all with a Paladin, then you basically have your hero power to be endlessly annoying, and with Justicar, that will provide even more, annoyingness, for lack of a better term. And as far as the last deck of Anderonie is concerned, we have not seen his Druid, so that's something to, look forward to in the future. But I would say that Zoro is in a pretty good spot here. Even against the Druid, Renalog can, take the win there. So just by virtue of being up 2 games to 1, I would say that... Anderonie here, just by virtue of the deck choices or the decks remaining, I say he has about a 60 to 65% chance in both of these games, just based on the deck. And so overall, if you multiply those two together, then he has a less than 50% chance to take the series. But as far as the player quality is concerned, I'd say Zoro will find a way somehow to take one of these games.
Well, I mean, Zoro's already taken 2 so far.
Wow.
But
oh, sorry. I looked at chat for 1 second, and I come back and I see like there's a naturalize on screen. I thought that was the mulligan. Sorry, guys. False alarm. False alarm. I thought that was like, why does he have naturalize? And it's like, looks like it is in his hand now, but it was just the Raven Isle false alarm.
D2's mind is instantly jumping to the deck archetype. He's like, well, you see, he's obviously running that, and it's like, wait a second. This is not Mulligan, or it's not Mulligan. Mildred. I remember when that deck was. I remember freaking Crip made this video. He's like, "Hey guys, this deck is super fun," and everybody's like, "Oh my gosh, this deck is super," and it was really super not fun. So I'm glad that we went through like the 3 days where everybody played that, and it was still a decent card to have for removal. But turns out giving your opponent 2 cards for just killing 1 is probably not a super great idea. I mean, hey, when it comes to fatigue, go for it, but not sure it will necessarily make it there.
Yeah, in any case, in this game, just going back to this, looks like Anderonie is pretty tilted right now. He has a very horrible hand, finally picks up a minion, and, I mean, he's at turn 5 and he hasn't played a single minion yet. He played the Raven Idol and went for a spell instead of a minion, which is kind of a curious decision, considering that he had 3 very bulky minions in hand already. By the time he picked up Shredder, he already was on turn 5, and now we'll be playing the Druid of the Claw, but you can see Anderonie there looking for some sort of emote to play out, just kind of, show the viewers, show Zoro how frustrated he was with the hand that he's gotten. But this is exactly what the Renalog is looking for, trying to get that advantage, or trying to like hold on against something like mid-range Druid so they can play their own cards out and not be on the back foot the entire time. That said, I mean, Anderonie, he took a while to get going, but from here he's going from Druid of the Claw into Sylvanas into Dr. Boom, which can be, pretty devastating.
Yeah, big curves coming up. I mean, that's kind of what happens when you have a really slow hand, is that, for a while it really sucks, but then you get a chance to play a ton of really, really high-quality minions, and that's exactly what he has the option to do, especially, Dr. Boom coming up. He will have to worry eventually about Thaddeus coming down, but that's why you have Naturalize.
Absolutely.
Take that 11/11 out. Of course, also you have the ability to just kill your opponent if he's able to get a little bit of board control against him. Now, I think the best opportunity here is maybe silence the Fugan? Then you can never go up against Thaddeus, but of course that's probably not the best option.
Yeah, you don't silence the first one, you silence the second one. Looks like Zoro was probably contemplating between the Twilight Drake plus silence or the Defender of Argus plus silence, but this way he gets a bit of a cleaner trade. And it's kind of hard for a Druid to deal with a big board, right? They basically, what they do is, get the board early themselves by use of ramp cards, and that's how they kind of come back here. And sometimes you can use combo to clear, and sometimes they can basically just have a board and force your opponent to clear, or else they die to combo, things like that. But at the moment, we see Anderonie definitely on the back foot, and we were talking about how Anderonie had such an amazing curve going forward, despite the fact that he had such a slow start that all of his hands were really clunky, but all those cards were really good. However, he basically ran into silence and then now BGH, so that's kind of an issue here for Anderonie. And now it's going to be a Twilight Drake into a BGH, and that's just going to be absolutely devastating. I think we might see actually Zoro go all face here. Yeah, I kind of like this. Basically, I mean, you have to race the Druid eventually. You can't just let him, keep drawing, keep giving him ways to be able to kill you. And it's really tough to deal with this board here from Zoro, though he does, speaking of Anderonie, does have a pretty good way to deal with a lot of it. By using his boom bots plus the swipe. I imagine use the swipe first and then use the boom bots. You could get some boom bots hitting some 1 health creatures. And let's see what these boom bots land. Hits the BGH. Boom bots hates BGH, by the way, and almost nearly clears the board. But he is at 8 health, which is obviously a bit concerning for him.
Right, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's so many ways you can die from 8 health. We just saw double power overwhelming be one of those from another Reno lock, so definitely possible. Unfortunately, there's no kill potential out there right now, but like you said, 8 health is pretty scary, so gonna have to keep an eye on.
Wow, rolls for 4.
Again, that's the second time Zoro's done that, by the way. So his and then he only runs 1 implosion per deck, so it's not like he gets multiple tries.
Well, that's why
times.
That's why he's rolling 4, right? Because if you have 2, then the game says, well, you have 2, you can just roll 2 on both of them. But if you have 1, it's like, oh, okay, you only have 1, so therefore we're going to give you 4 imps on this.
And D2, he figured it out. That's the secret. D2's letting us know the Hearthstone secrets. If you're a pro, then of course you got to know that. Now this is where Unleash the Hounds is really good. No, hey, it would be really good. Unfortunately, this is Druid and not Hunter. But let's see, does he go for the heal? He's thinking about it. He's unsure. What does he do? How does this work?
I mean, how do you not go for a heal here? I mean,
yeah, like what's the decision making?
You have to innervate into swipe, I guess. Maybe he's looking at his like. I guess if you're behind, maybe you have to take a chance here. Gonna go with the taking a chance route, and doesn't pick anything up. He isn't quite dead, I don't believe, as long as he uses his hero